Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank. David, it's nice to have you on the show.
Well, thanks a lot for having me.
How would you introduce yourself to everyone out there listening who doesn't know who you are?
How would I introduce myself? Well, I am one of Canada's leading military historians. I've been doing it for many, many years. I'm also I work in television. I also host, I have hosted several shows, a couple of series. I'm in a new one on History Channel in the United States, which is History's Greatest Mysteries. And we'll be looking for the aircraft from Flight 19, which got lost back in 1945 and started the whole Bermuda Triangle story. So I've been working on that, and I'm also a best-selling author. So there you go. That's a nutshell. And a teacher and a professor.
We're going to have a lot to talk about. When it comes to the military, for instance, what history are you interested in? Like specifically, are you interested in the kind of corruption aspect, or are you interested more in like the unsung heroes of the kind of genre that don't really get talked about?
Well, generally speaking, I kind of like the mysteries. I'm all about mystery in history. And if there's a mystery out there, then I love to tackle that, regardless of what it is. And that'll require 2 or 3 lives. But no, to give you an instance, there's a big mystery and a controversy in Canadian history, which also involves the Americans and the British. And that was the famous Dieppe raid from 1942. And you can see the poster over my shoulder. I spent 25 years researching that, and finally got down to the heart of the matter, what it was all about. But it was, these are the types of things that I enjoy doing. It's just one of those things where I'm intellectually drawn to stuff that just still has a mystery to it. JFK would be wonderful, but it's going to take a long time before we figure out exactly, what was behind that, due to a lot of the classification issues and some of the stuff that's still being held back, probably to protect sources and methods and people who may still be alive. But yeah, it's going to take a little while.
What do you think, I guess, interests you more? Because like I can give a specific example. Like when I was doing, so the 9/11 episode I had, it was episode 9/11. I had to do it on 9/11, but you can't just talk about it in an hour. So it was a 5.5-hour episode with 4 different people. And you're seeing, like, I wanted to get different perspectives of people that were, around. They were old enough. Like I was only like 3 or 4 at the time. So when that happened, I was so young, I don't know the full conclusion. But from the beginning of that episode all the way to the ending, you see my unbreaking and snapping of like, why the hell are they covering so much stuff up? What is going on here? Why are they doing a closed door testimony? Why is this money? Why did the scrap get sold to China not even a week later? And you start to realize the inner kind of like weird profitable aspect to something like this. And then that's what gets me interested in all the military stuff, like Operation Paperclip, any single government experiment, like the Operation Northwoods, which is supposed to blow up a airliner, blame it on Cuba just so we can invade there. Now, I know it's American history, sure, but everybody's history has some type of aspect to it where you look at it and it's like they're taking crazy pills. And I'm like, this is how you can rationalize, like when you see me ranting about these types of things, or you see Alex Jones talking about these types of things. Because if you would have said like Bohemian Grove, I don't know if you know what that is.
No, I'm afraid I don't.
So Alex Jones kind of exposed this, and this was big news when like Trump and Biden were doing their election things, but it's a video of a bunch of like main politicians that links in with Epstein, that little chestnut there.
Yeah.
And it's all these politicians dressed up in cloaks, burning a statue of a wood, or burning a little effigy of a wood person, like Burning Man, in front of a giant statue of an owl god named Moloch. And everyone's like, what? And it's like Danny Glover's there. All these people are involved with it. And it's like, this is real. And this was like 50 years ago. If you would have let this to anybody, everyone would be like, Epstein, that sounds like a ridiculous conspiracy. Then it all came out. And then now everyone's kind of moved on to the next trend, which is what I say, the lab. But I'm like, that just shows me like it's like being in a fraternity. Freemasons do the same thing. Why is that functioning the way it does? There's weird things where they study occult books and stuff. This is where I start going intense into it.
Well, I think that, there are conspiracies. I mean, let's face it, all it takes is 2 people to get together and plan something, and you've got a conspiracy. But I think one of the big problems is we don't necessarily follow the proper process for unraveling these types of mysteries and conspiracies. So as a result, a lot of people will tend to jump from A to Z without doing all the other letters in the alphabet, doing it properly. So as a result, when they come out with something, whether it's right or whether it's wrong, it's easily dismissed because the methodology isn't followed properly. And you can see that with a lot of different things like that. And I think that's one of the big things that I've encountered when I have taken on, if you will, the mysteries that I take on, is I try to adopt, or I do adopt, the proper methodological process, which is very methodical, a lot of research. Yeah, sometimes it's incremental. And really what you should be doing is approaching it with an open mind. In other words, you have a hypothesis, but the hypothesis is not like walking into court where you're going to say, okay, I'm going to prove this guy guilty, and then I'm going to try to jam the evidence in. The idea is you're going to test that hypothesis, and you're going to dig up as much evidence as humanly possible. And at the end of the day, your hypothesis might be 100% correct. It may be 0%. It may take you in a completely different direction. But the key is all of those results are valid, because what you're doing is you're going out there and you are actually testing. And a lot of times just putting something to rest is one of the most incredible contributions you can make. So for instance, I do this with my students all the time, and especially with 9/11, like you were talking about, because most of them now were not born when 9/11 happened. So suddenly there is that march of time. But I keep telling them that right now, based on the last 20 years and our historiography, as we call it in the history profession, our understanding of the interpretations of this, it really hasn't changed much. In other words, it's still Al-Qaeda, it's still Osama bin Laden. There may be other theories out there, but those theories either haven't been tested properly, or there is not enough proof to actually change our current understanding. It could happen. There's no doubt about that. But it's going to come down to the weight of the evidence. It's what we call the dialectic. In other words, you have a thesis, which is the current interpretation. You have the antithesis, which is the counter argument. And then depending on, and this is the key, the weight of the evidence, not just because I bring a counter argument, but the evidence of that counter argument, we may reach a new understanding called a synthesis. And then guess what? The whole cycle starts again.
Yeah.
So, in history, we talk about history being a continuous argument that never ends, but that's what it's about. It's about search for truth. Yeah. But I think a lot of these things, it comes down to the method, the method and the process.
I'm as open-minded as I think a lot of people are. When it comes to the concept of this, I never just, when someone gives me like the whole 9/11 truther thing, I'm not a fan of that, only because I have no clue. I went into it, I read a bunch of documentaries, I saw personal accounts. My belief is that they definitely shot 93 down, because in Dick Cheney's autobiography, he talks about giving the order to shoot a plane down, and the guy just hesitated on the call, and it turned out it wasn't a hijacked plane at all. So it's like maybe someone didn't hesitate and just decided to pull thing, but I don't know. But then I look at the easiest thing to kind of like say, like, hey, don't look into it, is by saying, well, all the family members on the flight overtook the plane, and then that nobody's going to want to dig that up, because now you're saying that those people didn't do that, and that I don't know.
I think you bring up a very, very good example here. And I think it's very, very difficult to deal with something that is as emotional as that. And sometimes, part of the process, I got to teach my students this, is sometimes no answer is the only answer you're going to get at the given time.
Yeah.
And I think the big problem where it turns into from legitimate inquiry to what we would know as conspiracy theory is when we take the limited amount of information that we have and then declare it as definite. That's the problem. So we don't. But look, I tend to agree with you. I remember being on that day wondering myself whether something like that had indeed happened. And then, of course, for a while, the evidence was like, no, the evidence certainly showed that the group on board certainly did it, heroically. And then you're right. There were certain releases that came out. There were certain admissions about the fact that, jet aircraft were scrambled, orders were given, and you can understand why. Without a doubt, you can understand why. I mean, this is the first time in recorded history, with the exception of the Japanese attacking American ships, at the end of World War II, where we actually see hijacking being used for suicide. So you could certainly understand that kind of Machiavellian decision, or maybe Machiavellian is not the right word, but that very difficult decision to do it. But the point is, we don't have the kind of direct evidence right now to firmly plant our flag and say, this is exactly what happened. But certainly the way the evidence is now starting to slowly come out, it's starting to look more and more like that was something that happened. And you can understand the government not wanting to say it immediately because, they don't want to deal with that issue, of did you really have to do this and why did you do this, etc. But now after 20 years, when people have been, I don't know if conditioned is the right word, but desensitized to the kind of ruthless action that would be needed to counter the ultimate ruthless action, I think it becomes more palatable. In other words, we can understand it. But again, just because we can understand it, just because we can think about it and seem that it all, fits together, doesn't necessarily mean it went down like that. It could very well be that they did give the order and there was a fighter chasing the plane, ready to shoot it down. And it just happened to be that the passengers acted first.
Well,
and we may just find that later on.
I just want to clarify this or preface this, is that like if any
Yeah.
time I bring up something you don't want to talk about it, just don't even, just we can skip right over it. That's fine. I'm not, these aren't, like I said, these aren't live, so I can just edit out. But
Yeah, no problem.
when I do want to talk about this, because I feel like you're a good person that I can actually balance out some thoughts that I've been having when it comes to a lot of these things. Like for instance, the lab, like that was a whole bunch of stuff. Like it didn't come from there. There was a whole like popsicle theory that it came off of a truck, the virus and everything. But then now they're finding that all the scientists that said it didn't actually had funded by Chinese people that were involved at that institute. And now it's actually being like, you can now say it. The censors had blocked it, called it a conspiracy, then opened it up to be talked about because now it's a probable theory to look into, where the Intercept really got 500 unreleased documents through the Freedom of Information Act, talking about how there were receipts and there was a lot of this gain of function research, and talking about how it was going to be put into a bat
Sure.
and then released in a cave and have it naturally spread. Now, where do you stand on that, just theory in general? Like, do you think that it's a plausible one? Do you think it's a conspiracy? Do you think it's because a lot of people are looking into it now. So I'm still like I said, I'm open-minded. So even if articles come out saying it did come from there and then it eventually didn't, I think it did, but I just look at it from a basic like virus, and then there's a place that studies them. So it only makes sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, it makes sense. It makes sense in the sense that it is suspicious. It is, you can't conclude from that because it is just, too elementary at the moment. We need to build up the corpus of data. In other words, you need to build up your evidence. But you know what? It's kind of like Law and Order, right? Beginning of Law and Order, there's always a murder and nobody really knows who the, who the victim is and what they were doing, where they were doing and why they were killed, etc. Well, that's kind of like where we are with the origins of the virus. Essentially we found the body, if you will, and now we're trying to piece everything together. And as I said, right off the top, it's very dangerous when we jump ahead of the process and we start with something that is so small. Think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, you get one piece in a jigsaw puzzle. All the other pieces are in the box, and you conclude immediately from one piece exactly what the picture looks like. Now, maybe the one in a million shot, you are right. But to go off and say this one piece in the puzzle tells me that this puzzle is a puzzle of Disneyland, and I am absolutely sure. And then you realize, when the pieces come in, no, it's swampland in Florida at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You have to realize the kind of dangerous disservice you're doing by running out and being absolutely certain. You can certainly say, I do suspect something.
Yeah, I do.
The evidence isn't there, and we're going to keep testing it. And there's no problem with that, because that's how we find truth, right? We throw out our hypothesis, we throw out our theory, and we say, okay, let's test it. And that's fine, because that keeps us moving. That keeps us thinking. That keeps us discovering. And that's wonderful. It's kind of like saying, is the world flat in the 1400s? Well, okay, we're going to have to cross an ocean and see if we can, fall off or find something else. That's kind of where we are in some cases. And I would argue, certainly with the virus, we're kind of standing on the west coast of France and we're wondering whether the world is flat or not. There's still a lot more data mining to do. We have to build up the evidence, just like in an investigation, with the police, where you can't just simply say, oh, well, the body's there and yeah, I know who did it. It doesn't work that way.
Well, it's just so hard because, Fauci was proven lying to Congress. So then it's like, how many lies have we had? Which we've seen a lot now that have not many people have really, and he's not going to be tried for that because it's like, well, he's a scientist. It was speculation at the time. It was like, well, you were called out on studying the coronavirus or using gain of function research, which turned out it was injected into mice that had human tissue that they were experimenting on. Now, that is obviously off of something that I read and that a couple articles and especially stuff that was released on the Intercept's website. So I'm like, I'm just waiting. I think everyone wants to see the president say something about it, and it's just not going to happen
Sure.
until obviously
Yeah.
they get all their ducks in a row.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things you have to do. I mean, first of all, and this is again, as the historian, you got to go back, you got to check your sources. You have to check the veracity of the source. And I don't mean, in part, the receptacle that it's coming from, whether it be a library, whether it be the government, whether it be an independent source, whatever it else, but also the evidence itself. You have to be able to get in, you have to sift through it, you have to weigh it, you have to verify it. And a lot of times, just because of the kind of world we live in right now, where we want everything instant, we want instant gratification. Sometimes we read far too much into a particular piece of evidence, or the piece of evidence may not necessarily have the kind of weight or the meaning that you think, because remember, the context is everything.
Yeah.
You need to understand. I mean, you know what it's like. You're going to edit this. Imagine if you just edited a couple of pieces of what I'm saying or what you're saying, and you could basically misconstrue anything.
Well, this is going to go up raw unless you tell me straight
Yeah.
up that there's a part you want edited out. I try not to do editing. It's a daily episode
No.
show, so that just gets difficult.
No, that's fine. No, I'm just trying to make the point that context is so important. I mean, if we're just if you cut this up into various clips, and you can or misconstrue anything you want. The key is, with all evidence, is to go back and find out the context, because it may very well be that if somebody is lying, like, and I've stepped into this quite a few times, because I'm also even though I'm a military historian, I deal with World War II and I deal with code breaking and signals intelligence. So as a result, I've had stepped into something where it has been classified or remains classified or had remained classified. And I keep thinking it's because of this nefarious reason, when in reality, it was something relatively simple, or something that they considered to be more important, like sources and methods and protecting things, and not necessarily what I thought. So that's one of the big lessons I learned with getting into this, is be careful not to put the horse before the cart. In other words, do it properly. You never know where it's going to lead you. Follow the evidence. Okay. There was something I learned when I was in the military very quickly. And it was, when you're doing an assessment, you never situate the appreciation, you appreciate the situation. In other words, don't go off with preconceived notions and try to bend all your evidence to fit it, because you're going to get a lot of men killed.
Yeah.
Okay. The key is, look to see what your enemy's doing. Understand what they're doing, regardless of what you think they should be doing, and react accordingly. And that is a very interesting lesson, which I've taken to my research and actually taken to life. I mean, it's good to be skeptical, okay, for everything that we look at. Just don't go crossing the line to becoming a complete cynic, where you don't believe or trust anything. You know what I mean? But without a doubt, you need to develop filters in your own mind where you're able to sift through things. And that's very difficult, obviously, in this day and age. On one hand, it's kind of a double-edged sword, where we have so much coming down at us, right? So much that there's so much there. But that's what, I'm teaching my students now is, look, we have to really almost operate like a classic intelligence analyst would, where you're taking all this incredible data, and then you have to sift through it. You have to make the right decision, and then you have to communicate that right decision to the decision maker, right? Or at least the right evidence. So we're almost becoming that, just because of what we're bombarded with. So it's a challenging time. For historical researchers like myself and historians. This is a whole new era. This is an amazing era, what we can do.
Media is so good because, social media is so good because it gives you the opportunity to search up a lot of this stuff for yourself too, and also hopefully find across the right articles. But it's hard to tell because there's so much lies that get put out there. For instance, like, I watched the trial with Rand Paul and Fauci. I watched his hands shaking. Everyone's like, he's shaking with frustration. I was like, that's a shake when you know you're about to get into a fight. Like, that's a, oh my God, it's about to happen. Your adrenaline starts pumping, or if you're lying really bad. And then next thing you know, it was true that he did lie in front of everybody. And then Psaki, their side, whatever you want to say, if it's the Democrats, whatever, came out and said, we don't plan on trialing him because it's science. So now that's a fact that he did lie about the research of gain of function. And I'm just like, I'm always still at this point, they could tell me you didn't. I'd be like, okay, cool. That's what just everything points to that. And I'm as open-minded as possible. So I'm not 100% in on it, but I'm more in now I'm seeing how many lies they covered up. Like in the beginning, the CDC told every governor you have to shut down all your businesses and keep people in their house for 2 weeks. That 2 weeks went longer than 2 weeks. It went for a couple months. Then businesses opened back up, and then everyone was blaming the CDC. And the CDC said, it's your governor's fault. Well, the governors were doing what you said. But that's the thing. It's like everyone's either pushing blame, and then you see this with the 9/11 thing.
But see, the problem is, and okay, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times it's just about covering your ass, not necessarily because you've done anything, premeditated, but now suddenly you realize all the shit's about to fall on you. So now it's about finger pointing. It's about pushing things in different directions instead of just somebody just, uttering the truth right
just
at the
be
beginning.
honest with your shit.
Well, yeah, just exactly. Head it all off at the pass. The problem is, and as much as, we talk about social media, again, like any other technology, double-edged sword, right? Cuts both ways. So in this case, as much as it can be great for getting people together and chatting and exchanging ideas, it can also either shame people into particular actions. It can be used to, you develop a phobia of it. Oh my God, imagine being somebody like Fauci who knows anything he says, or as you picked up, the fact that he was shaking a little bit can now be interpreted in many different ways, and it catches fire immediately. But the point is, his shaking could come from a wealth of different reasons. It may be you're right. You could be right at the end of the day. You could also equally be wrong. Yeah. It may be he has a condition that we don't know about, nor should we know about, because it's a personal medical condition, but we just don't know. What is required? More research. Get out there and find out more. Or somebody maybe just ask them a question directly. That's things like this.
That's my thing, is more research. But the whole entire time it wasn't even looked into. That's why now they're looking into it as a possibility. There was a documentary that was posted on HBO on demand. Like it was an actual like research into the lab. In the actual courtroom testimony, they said, have you ever used or tested bats there? They go, we've never had a bat at this facility since we opened up. There's videos when Obama went down there in 2018 when it opened up of them holding a fucking bat. So it's like, at this point, it's like you're just being lied to in front of your face. It's like now you're giving room for the people that want to believe this thing. And I want to know, do you think it came from there? Do you not?
I honestly, it's so early. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, what you're saying could also be just that typical corporate knee-jerk reaction. In other words, oh my God, yeah, we had a bat in here once and we did a photo op. Okay, let's hope nobody finds it and nobody say anything. Not because there was anything nefarious going on, just understanding how now, given the context of what's happening, how it's going to blow up in their face, right?
Or the Australian virologist that worked there said, no, I've worked at that lab. It never happened. And then turns out that after the bat thing came out where they did expose that, she deleted her Twitter and you can't find her now. It's a couple scientists that were speaking openly about this. This is what I'm saying. It's like, see what I mean with the lies or the kind of craziness that starts to happen? It's like you're not giving room. And I just want the truth. And if the truth is that it didn't come from there, then go with that. But it's like the 9/11 thing. Why did the families have to threaten Biden saying, don't come to ground zero unless you release those documents? And then he got scared a little bit and had to release some stuff.
But see, that kind of behavior is not uncommon with either the corporate mentality or with CEOs or with governments, etc. I mean, we had a famous incident up here in Canada. We had a fantastic military regiment called the Airborne Unit, like your 101st, 82nd. And they were in a combat in Somalia back in the early 90s. And two or three of their soldiers decided that they were going to take they captured a young starving Somali boy, teenager, and who was trying to steal food. And instead of turning him over to the military police, they ended up torturing him and murdering him as a way of showing just how tough and elite they were. And the Airborne Regiment knew about it. And instead of dealing with it properly, they ended up not wanting to be tarnished by this. So they tried covering it up. So basically you almost have a Sandusky and Penn State situation where everybody knows what's going on. And instead of just saying, hey, we can't control when shit happens, because shit is going to happen. You can't control that. They end up trying to cover things up or downplay it or whatever else, to the point where it gets them in more trouble. And they end up in the case of our airborne unit, completely disbanded, in disgrace, not so much because of what happened, but because they were so dishonorable in the way they tried to downplay it, to cover it up, etc. And it's the same thing with Penn State. Penn State's going to have a permanent black eye just simply because of the way they handled it. Nobody's ever going to blame you because shit happens, right? They're not going to blame you. Penn State, massive. How the hell is that going to, affect them if they have somebody who's a fly in the ointment? But when they actively go out to try to downplay it, etc. So that could be very well what you're seeing with this. In other words, that they're actually throwing unnecessarily gas on a fire when they don't need to.
Yeah.
And it actually then leads us down a blind alley. We keep thinking, oh my God, there must be something else there. There must be, and there may not be. And that's unfortunate. And again, to go back to what I said at the beginning, this is one of the reasons why we have to be very cautious about planting that flag of the definitive reason in something when we really don't have the vast preponderance of the evidence in our hands. When we're only working off a little bit of data, we can make the worst possible conclusions if we only have a small amount of data. So again, I agree with you. Research.
Yeah.
Research. Dig. Keep digging.
I know that's like a bit of a taboo topic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring that one in there, but I think much like me and you, we can kind of connect on the fact that the perspectives of things are so fucking fascinating. I mean, everything you're looking, it's like, what? And then you get more information, you're like, oh my God, what? And then it's like, I can see from a business standpoint or some type of thing, a lot of this stuff that happens, like with 9/11, why not talk about these things? Well, you don't want to let people know who you're trading with. You don't want, like, that's the whole thing of why they didn't want to release these documents, was in fact that there didn't want any ties with the Saudi government. But there's been known pictures with Bush's dad giving weapons to them and then us training them for attacks against Russia, which in turn they might have used it against us. But this is all stuff that we've seen. But the perspective of things, it's like, it's not necessarily, it's kind of like a dog eat dog world. Everyone's fighting for number one position. Every country's trying to get to that spot. And it's like the games that get played. Like for me, China, it just seems like a slow crawl of them slowly buying up like educational institutions like Confucius Institutes. Here's a good one for you. So I was wondering for a while when I was talking to academics, why so many kids like my age were all like, fuck, there's so much racism and there's all this stuff that's going on over here and everyone's out there wearing a KKK outfit. And I was just like, where's all this like anger coming from? Like even during the Asian hate movement, for instance, there was a woman that was kicked in the face, like straight up, like whatever, I guess not roundhouse, but a foot was just brought all the way up to her head and kicked right in the middle of the street. Everyone's like, it's Asian hate. Now, China, that video eventually they got the picture of the guy. Turns out it wasn't a white guy at all. It was someone else. And that's a personal kick. If anybody's ever seen that, you don't just walk up to someone to do a high kick like that. That just doesn't happen. That's a personal like revenge thing. But then the Asian hate thing, I was listening to a podcast with Josh Rogan. He's a CNN broadcaster who wrote a book called Chaos Under Heaven. He follows me on Twitter and I've talked to him a little bit about this, is that the fact that like during the Asian hate movement, China sent 13 tons of human hair over to San Francisco or whatever to be made for wigs. All we did was ask the question, we know you have like those Uyghur Muslim like concentration camps. They have these camps that they put them in, these little slave camps. Did the hair come from those people and did you pay those people? China said that's Asian hate. They did the same thing with Nike. They capitalized on that movement, saying that if you even question where your shoes are coming from, the amount of money people are getting for making these shoes, it's Asian hate and it's racist. You're racist. Now, this movement eventually died out, but this whole entire thing that it was using that as a good military tactic to be able to get their things across. Eventually, they said they weren't going to give us masks. We had our masks in another country. Eventually, someone was like, we need to start making masks in our own country. No shit. But it was this whole entire thing goes, now they have a business advantage. This is what tariffs or what these sanctions are about. You're able to find ways to where they can do their business, but they have to go by your guidelines. They can't just control the whole entire market of things.
Well, I'm not really sure how or what you want me to respond to on that one.
That business, that military business thing, that government,
well, it is.
It's
Look,
crazy, dude.
Yeah, it's always been. Look, military
I feel like I smoke
trade
crack
strategy.
And then I'm
military trade strategy they're all intertwined. It's been like that for years. I mean, if you want to be a very good, I would argue, if you want to be a very good CEO, you better read Sun Tzu, you better read, von Clausewitz and Jomini and things like that. And I've known some very successful people in business who have done that. I'm not necessarily saying that I support that, that approach. I'm saying that is the reality of it. So you do see that kind of warfare tactic. And you're right. I mean, let's face it, one of the big aspects in the spectrum of war is propaganda, is security and propaganda, and making sure you get your message out and maintain your message. So a lot of times, and again, it probably gets back to our idea of social media as a technological phenomenon, is that it is a double-edged sword. It's kind of the wild, wild west. There are no lifeguards whatsoever on the pool. And so as a result, it is so easy to get into social media and pollute it for whatever your purpose may be. And I think a lot of us are just kind of caught in the middle, right? There's a big, propaganda gunfight going on over our heads. We're the poor little kids in Syria that are trapped under artillery fire. Yeah. And that's kind of the way we are. So a lot of times we're seeing that. And then, it tends to have a polarizing effect on us. Instead of, bringing us together, we're being forced to choose tribes, and one or the other. And that's part of the destructive nature on this. But you go through history, you see the same thing. You see the same thing when it comes to all different types of technologies that have been introduced over thousands of years. There's always the intended positive aspect, and then there's a whole bunch of unintended consequences that come with it.
Well, this is the kernel I was hitting at, is that you studying military history, for instance, you see like where like the creepy stuff comes up to, but this is like the one time in history. There's a lot of people that just accept something at face value now. Either they don't want to dig into it, or they just agree with everything that gets pushed on the news or anything they see on the screen. Well, that's how it is. It's how I got to go. It's not necessarily that they're sheep. It's just a factor of like, do they not want to go into it? But from studying history, I know from studying like government projects and just researching all into these, maybe the bad side of the government, for instance, where I just go, can we just like raise the question? Is that okay to ask the question? I feel like questions are good. I think the conspiracy people are valid, and I think the people that take it at face value are valid. But I want to find why does everyone feel like they have a definitive answer? Even on the lab or whatever, I don't have a definitive answer on life in general. So I'm like, people are like, you got to get your shot. You got to do this. I'm like, you tell me my fucking middle name, I'll do what you say medically. I look at it like you start to hit this era where there's a lot of people that just want to either tell somebody because they heard it from something and they're accepting it at face value, or people that are refusing it because those people are sheep. I'm like, where's the middle ground? Everything throughout history, this is the one time I feel like the news has slowly shifted. I don't know if this has always been like this. Maybe you can highlight a little bit about the old school style of media, but media now is like everything's clickbait, and that clickbait is fucking up future generations. Everyone's like, oh my God, Jennifer Aniston's pregnant. You look into it. It's a clickbait article. She's thinking about it. It's like, well, everyone just sees the front cover, doesn't pay the $7.99 to get the magazine. Every Washington Post or whatever the hell you look into is subscription to read the article. Everything's money. Sure. Well, then I'm just going to read the headline and run off with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier, this idea of over corporatization. In other words, that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-capitalist at all. I'm anti-unbridled capitalism. In other words, the idea of, again, no lifeguards at the pool or the wild, wild west. You can exercise responsible, ethical capitalism, and everybody can benefit from that. Unfortunately, we're not living in that era. I mean, we're living in an era of get rich quick. Everything is, condensed into a tiny little segment. And, media in this day and age, I mean, that's a very broad term. You can't just simply say media and include all journalism, because you have some fine journalists who are out there still, who are, trying to establish the truth and doing it appropriately through the proper methodological procedures. But I mean, everything is compressed, and look at our life right now. I mean, part of the reason why we're accepting things is because, frankly, we're kind of beaten down, aren't we? Everything is coming after us. We're economically, although it appears we're living in a good world and relative to other people, I'm sure we are. But at the same time, the most precious thing on earth is our time. You can get anything back in life except time.
Yeah.
When we're born, the clock ticks. So the most valuable aspect that we have is time. And I think probably we kind of feel that. And we're like, oh my God, do I need to invest as much time into reading about Jennifer Aniston's pregnancy? Or is it just a question of click? Well, that's another story. I mean, a lot of it is just very quick entertainment. And of course, we're being rewired. I mean, we've got a communication device in our hand almost 24 hours a day, so we are being rewired in that sense. And we're much more accessible to a bombardment of data right now. And so it gets back to what I was talking about earlier, and what I work on with my students when I teach them is, we have to become our own intelligence analysts. In other words, we have to be able to take all that data, be able to sort it, sift it, check its veracity, weigh it, analyze it, and then produce something that makes sense at the end of it all. And that's really, I suppose, where we're going in this world. We're going to be forced into that, whether we like it or not, just for our own bloody survival. And so that's kind of where we're heading.
I get a little bit scared at people that just accept something that gets told to them. Because I mean, I think eventually at the point we're at now, there's a lot of people that are refusing to just get like a third booster, or there's a lot of people refusing to keep, because it's always just like, oh, you're gonna need another one after this, and everyone's like, well, fuck it, I'm just done with it at this point. And it's like, I don't want the wrong information being ran with. I would rather just people wait and kind of have that acceptance of like, I'm in for the long game. Like, if that's what the whole thing is, if this is a chess match, I would like to see what the end goal is. So I'm not going to like go and storm capitals or do anything like that. I just want to sit and wait for something to happen, or some unsung hero. I mean, this is kind of like the thing is, a lot of people invested time and this unsung hero attitude into Rand Paul. And I'm like, he's not your unsung fucking hero. He just is another person going against another side. This is all it is a game. There's one side competing against the other side. Everyone goes, well, you only got two choices in the vote. I'm like, hang on a second. If this is a simulation, why don't we test it? Get an independent in there. Have one guy that, that'll never happen. Why is that an answer? That'll never happen? Hang on a fucking second. If we haven't seen it before, maybe try it. And I start hitting this point where I'm like, this is how you get people that are QAnon. You get a bunch of people that were ramped up over a good goal. Beating up pedophiles, I don't think anybody wants a kid to be hurt in some type of way. But then they're attacking everybody that is not necessarily a pedophile, because it's like LARPing. And I'm like, this is what the world's coming into. I don't know if it's media. I don't know if it's exposure to social media, or now that we can actually look up what our government has done. Because I feel like this is the same government that's always happened. It's not really changed much. Maybe the heads changed, but I'm in the belief that there's something bigger running it. Not like Illuminati, like praying at a temple type shit, but just people that have a lot of money that can make the system seems like the system's very, very structured in a way.
Well, I mean, I understand what you're saying. And I think what you're getting down to is really that there's been a loosening grip on the rule of law. And this is the problem, where people feel frustrated that they have to take the law into their own hands because, for whatever reason, right or wrong, they feel the rule of law is not as strong or as perhaps honest as it should be. And I think that's really the problem. And I think, it's like I said at the beginning, it's fine to be skeptical. No problem with being skeptic. You don't have to accept everything that you hear immediately. But at the same time, don't be so reactionary as you go 180 degrees in the opposite direction and just simply throw out everything, and be so cynical to say, well, it's coming for the government, so therefore anything to do with the government can't be right. Well, no, that's not true, because the government, and I don't mean politicians, but the actual government agencies do hire, in theory, the best, the brightest that they can get. These are experts in their field, legitimate experts, who follow proper methodology, who are honest human beings, who, do their job properly. So you can't necessarily say completely everything from the government is crap or everything is great. You just have to be, skeptical about it, but not cynical. Test it, think about it. When I say do your own research, make sure it's not toilet Googling. You're actually doing some legitimate research. And that's one of the reasons why one of the reasons why I teach, is because I love to see that. I love to see that my students are college students. So I just absolutely love to see the light bulbs go off over their heads. And as a professor, I'm not teaching them what to think. I'm teaching them how to think. In other words, you're going to think for yourself and you're going to be able to come to your own conclusions. My job is not to teach you what to think. My job is to teach you how to develop the ability to teach yourself. And because at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. We all end up teaching ourselves. But I would argue right now, very few of us are actually equipped to do that properly.
I think I started diving down the rabbit hole, and you can get sucked into it for sure, like turn into an Alex Jones eventually, is when you start looking at Operation Paperclip, then Operation Secret Cherry Blossoms at Night. I don't know if you know what that one is.
No, fill me in on that one.
But I guess during the war, it was when China was going to launch, or it was Japan was going to launch like a submarine that had these missiles that were going to hit the coast of San Francisco, filled with like 150 million fleas or 150,000 fleas that were filled with bubonic plague. Yeah. So when I started looking at that, I was like, well, how much of this shit is out there? Then you start finding out, like, there's a book by Tom O'Neill. He talks about the Manson murders, and actually the government was drugging Charles Manson. Well, if you look into like the idea that the Unabomber was created by the government, there's a lot of evidence that shows, I mean, this guy was locked in an institution and tested on by the government for a very long time, where eventually he just kind of snapped. Did they mean to do that? I don't think so. But I think it was like an unintended thing that eventually happens. And I start looking at this, like, now it raises my questions more, where I'm like, there's a bunch of shit I didn't know. I didn't know about Bohemian Grove. I didn't know about Epstein. But then you start diving into Epstein's things. You look at all the flight logs that he has. There's Bill Clinton, Chris Tucker from fucking Rush Hour on it. And I'm like looking at it like, are we in like the best reality show I've ever fucking seen? Because like, this is like, maybe this is why when sports died, everyone got into politics. And now it's very hard to get back onto sports, because now you start to realize this is like fucking crazy level reality show, like in North Korea when they introduced the sister, and you're like, who the fuck is this? And it's like the evil sister nobody talks about, but he assassinated his cousin and then his main chief uncle that basically raised him with an anti-air gun. And people are like, well, that's North Korea, that's how it happens. Now I've heard Yeomi Park, who's a North Korean defector, on Joe Rogan, talk about her experiences over there and then coming over here, where she would touch people in America just to make sure that they had blood in their system, because they were brainwashed over there that we were cold-blooded and that we didn't have warm blood pumping through us, which is a lie, obviously. But you start realizing the propaganda tool is, I mean, I'm pretty warm-blooded as a person, but
well, generally speaking, I am too. I mean, I consider myself that. I'm not sure if my kids would agree, but yeah.
But the propaganda tool is intense, man. And I'm like, this isn't just like, oh,
you have a closed society, you can get away with that. You can, and I mean, you can take it, take a look at isolated communities. I mean, I remember having, a girlfriend's parents come here once, and I live in Montreal, which is a, big cosmopolitan Canadian city. And they were coming from a small town somewhere else in Canada. I'm not going to name where, but they had never seen a black face in their life. And they were in their 70s. And the ignorance that came out of their mouths about, all the stereotypes they had ever heard about African Canadians, it was unreal. And this wasn't a formally closed society. This was almost a willfully closed society, if you know what I mean. It was absolutely incredible. So, I mean, I think part of it, and, to get back, I mean, that's, again, double-edged sword of the internet and the kind of world we live in, where people now can have access to a wider range of things, depending on where they are. But the problem is we tend to put everything in silos. And of course, as you know, with the algorithms and everything else, if you click on one or two or three things that interest you, then you get bombarded with everything else that interests you. So as a result, you're not really spreading your knowledge, or your knowledge isn't spreading. You're almost being reinforced day in, day out with whatever your preconceived view already is. So again, this is, part of the problem. And I think it infects, or it bleeds down into the kind of discussion that we're having, the kind of quest and pursuit that you seem to be on, where, sometimes, and again, it goes back to what I said earlier, never situate your appreciation. Okay. Appreciate the situation. In other words, follow the evidence. The evidence may take you to where you think it'll go. It may take you 180 degrees in the opposite direction. It may take you to a whole new brave world. But that's all legitimate, man. You can't just, say, oh, I know what the answer is, and then therefore I'm going to put square pegs in round holes to reach my answer. But at the same time, you still have to ask those questions, don't you?
Yeah.
You have to ask those questions.
Do you have anything when you began your journey looking into like the mysterious stuff? Do you have anything that kind of blew your mind open, or something that really shocked you that made you start questioning more and kind of diving down this thing? Or is there anything that you have that doesn't really, I guess, something that you just don't know?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's anything that I've been, directly involved with. I mean, I suppose there were things, but they're kind of heavily nuanced. But I'll give you an example. I mentioned at the beginning of the show the Dieppe Operation. This is a 1-day raid, and for your listeners who may not know, this was considered Canada's darkest day in the Second World War. We lost 907 men in just 6 hours of combat on one day. And this was a raid on a German-held French port. And for years, we didn't know what the hell this was all about. In other words, they gave all these excuses. Oh, we were training for D-Day, which didn't make sense because that came 2 years later. How the hell would you know? Oh, it was to help the Russians. It was to do this. It was to do that. Well, I found a document many, many years ago, just one. And I started testing the hypothesis that this raid was actually put on to capture material specifically for code breaking purposes. And I just thought, okay, this seems outlandish, but I do have this one document, but I only had one document, but I do have to test it. And it took 25 years because I had to wait for declassifications, kind of like all those puzzles. I had one puzzle piece. Now I had to wait for the rest of them to come in. And then the big one was actually where they released finally in 2012. Okay, that's how long after World War II they had held this classified. Was that they actually were putting on operations that were dressed up to make it look like anything but what they were actually after. So in other words, they would put on a raid of 5,000 men to be able to get a commando unit into a particular target in a port, grab anything to do with the famous German Enigma machine so they could break into it. But they dressed it up to make it look like it was anything but to throw the Germans off the scent. Now, you can imagine, to me, that seemed to be complete conspiracy theory, right? It sounds crazy. Well, that's what I thought too, until I finally saw the policy documents, which actually lay out, yeah, this is how we do it. And we do it intentionally because we want to throw the Germans off the scent. And so there's no problem with doing this because we can actually get what we want. Plus, we can check off all the other boxes with 1,000 different things that we want to do. We want to score a propaganda victory. We want to help the Russians. We want to, just basically stick a finger in the rib of the Germans at this particular point. This becomes an incredible vehicle for all of this. But it came down to, again, these policy documents because, I'm like, there's no way they would do this. It's impossible. And then suddenly there's the policy document. Yeah, we have a pinch by, they call it pinch raids, okay? Stealing, it's a British term. We have a pinch by opportunity, a pinch by chance, and a pinch by design. In other words, build up a raid like this because we need to do something and we don't want the Germans catching on. Yeah. And until I actually saw those policy documents, I couldn't really make that connection legitimately. Yeah. I kind of suspected something was going on, but I couldn't make that connection. But because of the research, because I kept pressing, because, I ended up, going directly to GCHQ, which is the British version of NSA. And I just laid everything out. And I said, here you go in a 5-page email. This is what I can prove. Direct evidence, indirect evidence, preponderance of evidence suggests this, et cetera, et cetera. I'm coming out with this. So refute, deny, support, what have you got? Within 2 days, they had released that material because they knew I was kind of already onto it and we were pushing in that direction. And so that was absolutely amazing. So to see that really important piece of information was probably the greatest wow moment that I've ever had as a researcher, to the point where I was stunned by the whole thing and stunned by the speed of the turnaround of it all, which was interesting. So I realize that's a bit nuanced, but that gives you an example, how, you may find something earlier and sometimes it may just take a long time. You find something and you kind of say, this could be something here. This could solve one of the greatest mysteries that Canada has, and one of the biggest controversies of the Second World War. And then, had I come out with that in 1995, people would have easily dismissed me and basically said, this is conspiracy theory. This is not going to work. And I kind of thought, well, if I come out with it, then if there is anything that people don't want me to see or don't want me to find, I'm going to alert them that I'm onto it and they may put up roadblocks, for whatever reason. So I kept it on the QT. And I just basically did my research quietly until finally I felt I had enough to approach the agency in question, and I did. And apparently it forced their hand. And their official statement to me was basically, look, we were planning to release this in about 3 or 4 years. It's just in the pipeline. But because you're coming out with this, we'll express it. We'll put it right to the front of the line and you can get it. So they did. And that was a real game changer. So there you go. There's one of the big aha moments. And, you know, and I'm going to plug the book because you can read about it. You can read about it. My book is out all over the United States. It's called One Day in August. And it's all about the Dieppe raid. And actually the man who was behind the Pinch operation, and this is another another conspiracy that I had to tackle, was Ian Fleming, the legendary author of James Bond, who was much more of a legitimate intelligence, I won't say operative because he wasn't, but an intelligence officer in naval intelligence during the Second World War, who was responsible for creating these kind of operations. And so that book is out there all over the United States, and it'll lay out how, I would argue, how you actually tackle these kind of big potential mysteries. Okay. And how, you know, I take the reader, kind of like Law and Order, I take it as a mystery, and I take the reader through my research journey, which is really cool because not only are you seeing what a historian and researcher can do, but you're also reading about one of the most amazing stories of the Second World War. And it unfolds. The way I write it, I peel it back layer by layer like an onion, right? So build up the mystery and whatever else, and then you see the revelation of it all. But the key is, it's all based on evidence, all properly sourced. You can go back, you can take a look at the evidence yourself. If you want to have arguments with me on Twitter or Facebook about the evidence, please, I enjoy that, because at the end of the day, it's not about who's right and wrong in an argument. It's about the journey and what we learn from that argument, you know, because a lot of times just having that argument gives us the truth.
Does it not get frustrating, though, that people would refuse evidence? I mean, it's kind of like the situation you see now, like we talked about earlier in the beginning. There's people that refuse, even though it's on, a person comes out, vice president or president, whatever's main secretary, Psaki, her Psaki bomb, she talked about it. And it's like people are still denying the fact of it. Does that ever get super frustrating?
Oh, it does. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I've had critics, or not even critics, I won't even use that proper term. I've had detractors who won't even read the book. Okay, like that. Like, I have no problem if you read the book and you disagree with me. If you disagree with my conclusions, you disagree with the evidence I brought or my interpretation, fair game. But to just say, oh no, it's impossible, I'm not even going to read this, is ridiculous when somebody has put 25 years. And to be honest with you, I've gone through 150,000 pages of material. It is the study on that particular operation. So that kind of willful ignorance is terrifying, because we do see a lot of that, you know, regardless of what it is. And sometimes, you know, stuff can be dismissed because the evidence just isn't there. It's not solid, and fair enough. But you at least have to, you know, pay the person enough respect to at least examine it before you come to your decision to dismiss.
I'll have to send you an episode of a podcast and have you back on, because I think you would be able to relate to this a lot. But it was the Tom O'Neill guy I was mentioning about the Manson murders. He spent 15 years writing that book and getting documents released. And it turns out about, like, he was on probation, but he was able to go to like 5 states away to go survey land. And Charles Manson didn't even have experience to survey land. So it's a lot of questioning stuff. And it started to lead into Operation Midnight Climax, where they were drugging people, like main politicians, at brothels, and then having them do these nefarious acts or get caught in these scandals to get videos of them about. And it's a bunch of stuff that seems like, even listening to it, I was like, this just sounds insane. But now they're going to make a Netflix series on it. They're going to make it, well, they're going to make a movie, but then they want to do a series because it's just that jam-packed of 15 years of research into this. And you have 25 researching into this. Does it, like, because if they're, what are their main points saying it's impossible? Because I don't think anything's impossible.
Just because the concept of it. And I'll be honest, I thought it was the same thing. I found this one document many years ago that talked about Fleming's creation of this commando unit. And this was a naval intelligence document. So, it was legit from the time. And they said that the party at Dieppe didn't reach its target. And this was the first time that I had ever seen anything to do with code breaking, which was considered to be beyond top secret. It was ultra secret, anything to do with one of the greatest mysteries of the Second World War. And I thought, okay, well, this is fascinating. And I thought, and then I was reading down, and one of the other passages said, no pinch operation, okay, so in other words, capturing this material, should ever be put on in isolation. It should always be done under the pretext of a larger operation. And I thought, okay, I know what it's saying, but does that really apply to Dieppe? Would they actually put on the Dieppe raid with 5,000 men to be able to get a commando unit to a target and get out with the kind of material? And at the end of the day, believe it or not, yes. And so, at first I'm sitting there going, there's no possible way. And I was very aware of the kind of flack I would take. And that's one of the reasons why it did take, 15 years before the first edition of my book came out, another 10 years for the second edition. And probably now, like I said, 150,000, that's conservative. Over probably 150 to 180,000 pages of material that I have. I've got close to 400 gigabytes of digitized material, on my computer, which is just nuts. Like, I just can't believe that we can do stuff like this today. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, right? The idea of, this brave new world that we're in as historical researchers and researchers in general. The digitization, the world of digitization is incredible. The breadth and the depth of what we can do as historians now is unlike any other time in history. Think about what we are going to understand about ourselves, what we're going to learn, the mysteries we're going to be able to solve. Basically, a lot of the stuff is probably more at our fingertips than we really realize. It's just that we haven't developed our intellectual infrastructure yet to really harness it in a proper way.
That's what I get scared about censorship on YouTube and Facebook and all that, because I mean, for the longest time, if you would have even said the words lab, you would have been taken off. And then now they relieve those things. So now I'm like, now you're really bolstering up all these, if you want to say conspiracy people, or if you want to say people that have been screaming it from the rooftops from the beginning, you're not proving to their point, where there's a lot of people I knew that were against it and now they're kind of in it. Even people involved in the military that would call me an idiot on the show. And it's like, well, I'm not saying it is. It's just the factor of I'm looking at that as being a possibility, because there's a realm of thought out there that the government could never do anything so secret. I was like, they used to do a lot of things back in the day that you wouldn't even expect. If I would have mentioned Bohemian, if that Epstein thing, if everyone actually looks into that, nobody would have ever thought that was happening, or any of those flights that were happening, but it did happen. There's Bill Gates' wife that used photos of Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein hanging out together on these private flights. Like, there's a lot of evidence that comes out, but it's so, because I think it's too crazy to believe. It's like when I saw the Bohemian Grove video, I was like, what the fuck am I
Yeah,
watching?
I know, but you also have to be careful of not jumping. Like I said, don't go from A to Z. All right. You have to make sure you hit B, C, D, E, and
Yeah.
E all the way along. That's the key.
Well, it's just
Because,
a hangout with friends. That's all
well,
it is. But
I mean, you are a public personality. I public personality for working in television, doing the books and everything. I get people coming to my book signings. Hey, can I get a picture with you? Sure. I find out, 3 yeyears later, this guy is, KKK card carrying
I've had a
neo-Nazi.
couple
Hey,
guests that
wait
were.
a second. Wait a second. I didn't know. I'm not endorsing that. This is just somebody who asked for a photograph. Somebody who liked my book. I don't understand his politics. We've never had a conversation. I don't understand what his views are, so you got to be careful with this. And it would be the same thing with somebody like, Gates and Epstein. That realm all traveled together. It doesn't necessarily mean that because Epstein was into something, it necessarily means that Gates was into something as well. It just means that for that particular moment, they were together for that photograph. Right. And then you have to dig into the context of that photograph.
Well, on the private logs
context
of his flights, there was Bill Clinton on there more than one times. That's what his wife used against him in the thing. It's why she got a lot of the money.
Well, that's why you got to check the evidence, right? You got to verify that. And again, you're going to have to try to find it from multiple sources. You can't just take the one thing that supports your preconceived notion and run off on it. You have to be able to, again, like I told you, keep an open mind, follow the evidence, and make sure that you cross-reference that evidence, because that's the key. And if that's the way that you tackle great mysteries and great potential conspiracies, it's about the methodology. right? It's not necessarily about being right. It's approaching it in the right way. And at the end of the day, you may find out that Gates may have been with him for a completely different reason and had absolutely nothing to do with it. Okay. I'm not saying that's happened. I'm just saying I don't know.
Well,
it could be. But imagine the damage you do to a character like Bill Gates if you don't do your homework, and or anybody, doesn't matter if it's Bill Gates. You know, you come out and you say, "Oh my God, there's a picture of him and Epstein, therefore he's a pedophile."
Well, I've said I've said multiple times I don't know if he was there for that particular reason, because Chris Tucker, for instance, someone told me Chris Tucker was involved in the flights. I had to look that up, and I go, yeah, but I mean, isn't it just he hung out with cool people? It's kind of like if you hang out with someone because he hangs out with scientists all the time. That's what Epstein was friends with, scientists and famous actors. But there goes to the point of like, when you start going into like the Epstein thing, for instance, Bill Clinton, and then all the scandals with Bill Clinton coming out, I'm not necessarily saying that that's what they were all going there for, but I'm looking at the concept of like, there's a lot of things that kind of lead up into something. I pick on Bill Gates for other things. One thing is the fact that he tried to launch a missile at the fucking atmosphere to dissipate particles to dim the sun in fucking 2011 that no one fucking talks about. That's evil shit.
That's James Bond Spectre, you know, Dr. Evil.
Yeah. And then he's friends with all the people on the Nobel Peace Prize committee because he wanted a Nobel Peace Prize. Like, I don't think he's like a necessarily, everyone talks about the microchip shit. I'm like, no, you have your cell phone. It doesn't make sense.
But remember, we are getting away from that rule of law, the basic concept in the rule of law that we're innocent until proven guilty. And, you know, unfortunately, we tend to jump the gun when we see that. I mean, you know, think about, you know, you're a bit younger than me. But, you know, okay. So, yeah, you're a bit younger than 32. Me.
That's opposite. I'm 23.
Are you? Yeah. Put it this way. You're as old as my daughter. So my oldest daughter.
Dad?
So you could. Yeah. Try proving it. Try proving it. I don't know where I was going now, but oh no, I was saying that, you know, think about guilt by association. How many times, and maybe it hasn't happened to you, but it happened in my life where I get invited to various places. I get invited to parties. You go there and you just don't like or fit in with the scene, or you just don't agree with the shit that's going down. And you're like, okay, just gracefully, you kind of exit, you know, smile, thanks a lot for having me. And holy shit, I'll never go fucking back near that. You know what I mean? Those things do happen. And so it could very well be that some of those people, you know, oh my God, Jeffrey Epstein, he's a mover, he's a shaker, he's got his own private island. Oh my God, this is great. You know, then you get there and maybe you find out, maybe you don't. You know, all I'm saying is you got to be careful with jumping to conclusions when it has a dramatic, disastrous effect on other people.
Yeah.
You know, that's the key.
That's like, I'm not a right wing. I'm not a left wing. I'm more probably libertarian in a lot of my viewpoints on things, but I'm open to all like realms of like when people talk. I think this is easy. Like this type of discussion is a good discussion. I think people need to understand that there's a healthy way to talk about these things. It always just doesn't need to be like, cut this person out or consider that person dumb. It's about talking about these things. But when it comes to like, for instance, like I don't like censorship because like even I don't like Trump, but I don't want him off social media because that just what does that do? What are you proving? You're like, it's like the reason people go, well, if he's so much of a conspiracy theorist, then why is Alex Jones still up there? It's like, well, hang on a second. They've already ruined his character, even though Alex Jones has gotten a lot right. Like he talked about, I think 2.5 years ago, that China owns Hollywood. Turns out over like during that Fast 9 movie, John Cena recognized Taiwan as a country, and China, that's a no-no. So he had to apologize in Mandarin, and there's a video of it where he speaks fluent Mandarin to China apologizing. They made $150-something million opening day for Fast and Furious, and 100-something of that was from China and 30-something of that was from the States. So you start to look at like maybe China does own Hollywood.
Or maybe the fact is we're too much as a society, we are far too enslaved by the concept of corporatism. In other words, let's get back to responsible capitalism, ethical capitalism, where we say,
what's respect?
Well, basically China, we're going to look for other trading partners unless there is a change when it comes to human rights. You know what I mean? I mean, this is something, and to be honest with you, perhaps I'm sounding very Canadian,
I don't think
but
so.
that's essentially what we're trying to do. And there's nothing wrong with using what economic power we have if we bond together or band together to be able to say, look, China, change your freaking ways. I mean, look what we did with South Africa. Now, mind you, China and South Africa are different, kettles of fish when it comes to the economy. But remember that, South Africa back in the 80s was all about apartheid, a racist system for government and for society. And eventually it took awareness in the Western world, because most of the time we just turned a blind eye to it. But then eventually the Western world put sanctions on South Africa and brought apartheid to its knees. Now, mind you, South Africa is not the kind of trading partner that China is. And maybe there's already too much, water out there and we can't do it right now because of where we are. But maybe it's time to start looking at different partners. I mean, certainly Great Britain needs a new partner after Brexit. And, the European Union needs tighter strengthening, if you will, or ties to them. And maybe even at some African states, South American states. Why do all easy roads lead to China? And that's basically what it is right now. It's easy, right? It's easy for us to do this. So maybe it's a question of us getting more responsible, and we can be ethical with it. We can continue on. You don't have to say and throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, hey, I don't like unbridled capitalism and therefore I'm a socialist or a communist. No.
Now,
just do it properly.
I have a couple friends in Canada, but they were all talking about, I think it was like a month or two ago, they were talking about how China wanted to put troops in Canada or something like that to train or do something like that. Did you ever hear about something like that?
No.
I don't know if that was Montreal or Quebec that I heard that from.
That I have never heard. And as a matter of fact, I've never even heard that discussion.
Who's the guy that starts with an S as your mayor, governor down there?
Well,
everyone hates him right now.
Well, it could be in Ontario.
You brought your eyes down.
No, because I'm sitting there. You have to understand there's
a lot.
Our premiers, as we call them. Okay. The premiers run our provinces, and then we have the prime minister whose government runs the country. Most of our premiers are kind of hated at the moment, or at least under fire. Would you be talking about the Ford, Rob Ford, one of the Ford brothers?
I think people don't like Rob Ford because he did cocaine or something, right? Because that's like one of our mayors.
Well, like Marion Barry. Yeah.
If he did his job right, then what the fuck's the problem? That's what I say. Is like they reelected him.
People can't exactly several times, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, no. But to be honest with you, I have never heard anything like that.
He starts with an S. I don't know if it's San or something. There was a lady that said that she wanted to bang him because he was so beautiful looking. I forgot who it is, but he starts with an S. Come on. How many people got with an S?
No, that I can't think of. I can't think of all the. Yeah, you're going to have to, because I just can't figure out. It's not ours here in Quebec, because I don't think would have that kind of attraction to women. Or at least they wouldn't be attracted to him, I should say. But I don't know. Maybe it's out west. It could be out west, maybe in BC.
I keep forgetting how big Canada is.
I don't think it's. Yeah, we're slightly large, aren't we? Yeah. The only problem is, and like what we like to say is, we're on top of the United States, and we have 1/10 of your population, and it's all basically in the southern 5% of our country. But we are the icing on the cake. That's the way we like to view ourselves, by the way.
I don't think it's Trudeau. I know it starts with an S.
Okay, well, Trudeau's the prime minister, but no, there's nothing there that I've never heard anything like that. Now, mind you, I was in the army when the Berlin Wall came down and the communist East Bloc collapsed, and within a year, we had former East Bloc officers in our mess. From the Ukraine, from Romania, from Bulgaria, from Hungary, all these former, Cold War enemies that we were, trained to fight. We're now hosting them in our mess, which was interesting to see the way the world worked. I don't think we're like that with China.
I just found it.
As a matter of fact, who is it?
So it's Justin Trudeau, and he invited Chinese People Liberation Army to train troops in Canada, according to secret top documents.
Really?
So the top secret government documents
I'd like to see.
That
I
Canadian
need to see
Prime
those.
Minister Justin Trudeau invited China's People's Liberation Army to send its troops to Ontario for cold weather training and was unhappy when it was canceled, according to 2 Canadian media outlets. The Canadian government's bombshell secret 34-page file was obtained by Rebel News and the Globe and Mail.
Okay, the Globe and Mail, much more respected than Rebel. Rebel has its particular agenda, and so as a result,
I heard, like I said, I didn't. I guess it wasn't a month ago. It must have been before that, but it was in December of 2020. But I heard my buddy, who's I don't remember. He's way behind us in time zones. So I don't know if he's because I have my friend who's in Halifax.
Where is he? Out west? They're ahead. Where are you? Where are you located?
I'm at EST, so that is Maryland.
Yeah.
So that's EST's time zone. He's about like a couple hours behind me, I think, but he's
so he's either mid Calgary, maybe.
Calgary. He's he has a bag.
Hours.
Shout out to him, Bag Milk Podcast. I didn't know what bag milk was because apparently that's a thing in Canada. But Brian Bridges, he was the one talking about it. He goes, why did that happen? But I guess people made enough of an issue of it over there where eventually they just said, no, don't come over here. But that was a real thing. Chinese troops wanted to train in cold environment. Now that happened over here too. They tried to train in Alaska and we said no.
Okay. So what's the reason then? If this is true, then you have to say, okay, well,
everybody's obsessed with Antarctica because there's probably a lot of information there, but that's the best way to train if you're going to train is in cold weather environments. But if that's the goal, you can't just go right to the goal and start training there. You have to find places to train to get build up to it.
It would have to be the Arctic environment because China does have cold weather. There's no doubt about that. I mean,
below freezing sometimes.
Part of China. Oh yeah, no more than that. I mean, if you go to the northern part of China, you're talking about Western Russia essentially.
Yeonmi Park, when she was escaping North Korea, there was negative 30 something degree weather that they had to go through.
You mean Canada? So that's basically it. I mean, where I come from in Montreal, we either have the hottest summers, which are, between 90 and 120 degrees, depending on, and with the humidity. And in the winter, we can go down. We're mostly about what we call -10. So it's -10 to -18, which is like your zero, so that's basically what we're like almost every single day.
I think that was the first thing that I've heard and then said, and then had to look it up because I didn't have all the facts to it. But most of the stuff I'm looking through and I'm actually making sure before I start saying something, I promise to you.
That's fine. No, but like I said, and you'll notice the way I've approached it. In other words, that's very interesting, but let's do our homework more on it before we just simply jump to a conclusion.
I know what you really want to say. You want to say, God damn it, Robbie, what are you saying to me right now?
Well, I mean, no, but I mean, part of it, no, part of it is, and let's face it, like I said at the beginning, I mean, I'm a college professor. I deal with people who have inquiring minds, and that's wonderful. It's just make sure that you're not jumping to conclusions right away. You have to be able to do your homework. I'm
not the type of person that wants to lead a blowhorn to have a bunch of people storm the Capitol. I'm more of a type of person where I go, isn't this some weird shit? But then I look, I'm not that type. That I'm more than happy to say then it's not that as well too. Like I'm not confined to anything, and I think that's what you need to be as a person, is just be in the middle road. I know people hate that guy who can't make up a decision, but I think it's a factor of just waiting.
You're absolutely right. Waiting and doing more legitimate research. In other words, because too many people are running off and being definitive one way or another when there's just no way that you can be definitive legitimately. So I applaud anybody who is has a legitimate inquiring mind. Okay, not National inquiring mind, but you know what I mean. A legitimate inquiring mind.
Do you have anything on your mind that you've kind of never got an answer to, or you're kind of against the norm when it comes to a couple of things? Like for 9/11, I have the shoot down thing for me. That's like the thing is I think that flight was.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. Not to say that that's exactly what happened, but I would certainly agree with you in the sense that I suspect something along those lines. Yeah. And again, like we discussed earlier, whether it's a question of the order was given and they just didn't catch up. Because remember, the evidence on the ground does not suggest that a missile was used, if it was, or any type of shoot down per se. Doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't something like a tipping or, a different type. We just don't know. We don't know. It requires further investigation, but it certainly is a plausible hypothesis to test. And that's the key. to test that hypothesis without jumping to a conclusion.
And then
And at the end, we may be right, or, maybe we'll find something different.
That's what I like, because I've said that to a couple of people who are 9/11 truthers, and they'll just stop talking to you. And I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to get upset over that little thing where I'm just like, maybe it's not that, maybe it's this, but what is in your mind one thing that you've kind of had questions on, or one thing where you're like, this is it, and it's against the norm, besides the thing we've mentioned before with the book and everything? Because that's obviously,
I'm not sure if it's necessarily against the norm. Just sometimes I go in a different direction, and I would argue it's what I've been working on for the last little while with History Channel in the States, which is the Flight 19 mystery.
Yeah.
The flight of 5 torpedo bombers that takes off in December of 1945 off the Florida coast, never seen again. There's so many different types of theories of what happened, whether it was time, space continuum, alien abduction, or just the fact that somebody had a bad day and led them all out to disaster.
So I think I've mentioned this one before. Is this the one where like everyone's becoming like, it sounds like the radio breaks or something like that? They say something on the radio, then they all go missing. And then I think they hear another broadcast a little bit later, but it's a short little quick one.
Yeah, pretty much. What they're doing is it's a quote routine training flight that takes off from Fort Lauderdale, and they're supposed to head out to a place called Chicken Shoals, which is not far off from Bermuda, well, the area of the Bahamas and Bermuda, and they're supposed to do just a triangle and come back. And suddenly they get an SOS. At least Fort Lauderdale gets an SOS saying, "Hey, we're lost. This is the flight leader. We're trying to establish our direction. Essentially, we think we're over the Florida Keys." And of course, people are shocked because you're not supposed to be flying south. You're supposed to be flying east. So what the hell are you doing over the Florida Keys? And then after a while, it is what you have mentioned. We start picking up radio transmissions of arguments going on between the instructor and the who is the flight leader, and the senior pilot who actually outranks him. So now you've got this argument. We have to go east. No, we have to go west. Floor is on our left. Floor is on our right. And they're trying to figure out where they are. Meanwhile, there's a whole series of what are called direction finding stations, which during the Second World War, and this is really cool, were used to hunt U-boats. In other words, every time a U-boat would send up a radio transmission, you would try to triangulate by intercepting the signals and figure out where that U-boat was because of the transmission of their radios. Well, basically, by the end of the war, when you had no more U-boats to hunt, you switched that over to air-sea rescue. And so as a result, what they were doing was they were direction finding the flight of aircraft coming up. And they actually were able to establish that it was on the East Coast, so where essentially everybody but the flight leader thought they were, and they were following, and you can see the progression up, basically almost like in a northeast angle, coming up parallel to the Florida coast. And then finally they get a firm fix, but that's when all hell breaks loose, and nobody's sure whether the flight stayed together, whether the argument got so bad they all decided to go in their, in a different direction, or whether the flight leader decided instead, thinking he was in the Gulf of Mexico as opposed to on the East Coast, he decided to turn east and ended up flying everybody out to the middle of the Atlantic, or at least further out in the Atlantic, or whether because of the weather that night and the fact it was now dark, that they just completely overshot Florida and ended up in the Gulf. So there's a whole bunch of different conspiracy theories out there and various theories. Some are bizarre, like completely bizarre, but our approach is let's just start with the logical ones first, the plausible and logical ones. And then at the end, if we can't figure it out, then we'll start getting increasingly more out there, if you will.
I've heard the thought that sometimes, like especially at night, that the sky matches kind of the water in a way, and when you think you're going up, you could actually be going down just after so many hours of flying.
Yeah, it could very well be. They're also running out of fuel. It's not like in this day and age where you have GPSs. There's also human error. In other words, once they get the direction fix and they know on land where these aircraft are, or at least the one guy who's transmitting, it does not appear from the logs that we have that they were told where they were. You would think that would be standard.
Yeah.
In other words, hey, we found you. You're 150 miles off of Daytona Beach. Just turn west and come home. That's it. but there was issues with, with navigation. There was issues with the compasses. The compasses apparently were out, and the question is why. And this is what kind of, we go back to our earlier discussion, this Pandora's box of conspiracies that open up when somebody just doesn't tell the bloody truth. The question is why? Was there a mechanical failure? If so, who's responsible? Do we have a layering of ass covering going on? In other words, oh my God, yeah, we never fixed the compasses that we were supposed to. So therefore, don't tell anybody, not realizing that's going to, basically throw fuel on a conspiracy fire. Could it be, certainly by the end of World War II, and this is to get back to your question about going against the conventional norm, my hypothesis, and I just a hypothesis that I'm testing right now. Yeah, testing it right now, is that they could very well have been either the knowing or unknowing target of some sort of electronic warfare exercise. Because by end of World War II, electronic warfare was incredible. I mean, the stuff that was going on over Germany and over Japan by the end of World War II was amazing. Like you just don't understand the air war unless you understand the electronic war that's going on. And it could very well be that maybe this was a routine training flight for the guys on board, but maybe there was something else going on the ground. Now, like I said, complete hypothesis. But it's one of those things where, hopefully I'll dig up the information and we'll test. And at the end of the day, if it proves to be that, fantastic, we've solved a mystery. If it turns out that my hypothesis doesn't have any merit, then we can put that hypothesis to bed forever, right? And we can just check off the box and say, okay, we looked at the possibility of electronic warfare error or whatever else, and that didn't work. So let's move on to something else. So that's basically that goes against the conventional, because I've got people out there going, no, it was just human error. And I've got other people going, no, it was alien abduction. So, you get caught in the middle.
I'll have to connect you with a past guest. She's a good friend of mine. Her name is Jessica Irwin. She's an underwater archaeologist who deals specifically in World War II. So that was her thought when we talked about this on her very first episode. We talked about that specific incident. I just didn't know the name of it. I remembered reading a case when I was reading about Amelia Earhart, and there was another one that was linked with that when it talked about incidences in the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah.
And that was one that got brought up as well too, where I didn't know the names. I just remembered like the radio cutting out, then hearing something like a transmission another hour later or so. But she brought up the electrical thing as well too. So it kind of like exactly what you said.
Yeah, there could be. And like I said, the idea is to start with the logical. Right? Start with the easiest and the logical, and then just like a checklist, test each one of those hypotheses. And then as you go on, you can eliminate them, or if they bear fruit, boom, you've got your answer. That's it. But it goes back to, the idea of doing this in a proper methodical way. Don't rush to judgment. Don't rush to a conclusion. And, it's a hell of a lot of fun to be able to investigate these things. I'll be honest. Gets you out of bed in the morning, and it gets you turning pages in documents that otherwise would be extremely boring unless you thought that maybe you're able to solve a mystery with each turn of the page.
Well, they've, I think recently just found a lipstick that was known for like Amelia Earhart's lipstick. That she I guess everyone knew the type she used or something like that, near one of the islands near the Bermuda Triangle where they have pinpointed or think that this is where she landed in.
Well, I don't think she was ever on that part of the world. As far as I know, I thought she disappeared over the Pacific.
Thought she went to Bermuda Triangle.
No, she wasn't. So if somebody's putting her there, then they're making stuff up because I think the most prevalent theory was that she ended up on a Japanese held island somewhere in the Pacific just before the war, or somewhere near there. That's one of them. But I mean, as far as I know, she never made it to the east coast of Florida or off the east coast of Florida.
I had to Google that one too.
Yeah, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with that. You're doing your research. This is good.
I swear to God, I thought it was the Bermuda Triangle. I might have gotten it wrong, but I know they found a lipstick of hers on one of those islands recently.
Well, she is one of the greatest mysteries of all time, right? I mean, we were talking about JFK assassination, whatever. Amelia Earhart, without a doubt. I mean, nobody from what we can see has ever found any definitive proof. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, or I should say circumstantial evidence out there, which could suggest In other words, you would have to say that, how many people would be on a remote island in the Pacific carrying the kind of lipstick that she was known to have? There's a possibility that there could have been somebody else, but the probability would be very low. So again, that wouldn't conclude anything, but that would certainly buoy you enough to continue your research in that area, right? Because you have found something that is, potentially a smoking gun's not the right word, but potentially a very important piece of evidence. And therefore that would merit further investment in your research one way or another,
Because with Amelia Earhart, wasn't it like that she was flying and they think that some type of whatever electrical malfunction or something with the weather that causes like interference with maybe some of her systems?
No, actually, that's the Flight 19. That's the Flight 19 issue.
I know it was the
It's
same.
okay.
This is
you're
all coming from
the two.
8th grade knowledge. I watched a documentary that included both Amelia Earhart and this flight in there. And that's what
okay. So what did you learn from our discussion today?
That school sucks.
Cross-reference.
Holy shit.
School doesn't suck. Maybe you had a bad teacher at one point.
I remember sitting in the library. I'm trying to remember that PowerPoint. I just remembered they showed like I guess a reinterpretation of it, but it was the plane and then it was covered by a bunch of okay.
It's got to be Flight 19 when it comes to that. I've never heard that in connection with Amelia Earhart. As far as I know, it was more just navigation. They got lost, or it may have been bad weather, but normal bad weather, if you will, that may have brought her down. She was just never heard from again. So yeah, you're kind of conflating the two. But again, the idea is, hey, get out there. I mean, think about what we have. We got, for better or for worse, we got Google on our fingertips right now. I tell my students that. My students ask me all the time. They're like, what is, tell me the definition. You have a potential dictionary in your hand as you speak. Google the definition of something.
So I'm seeing the Flight 19 thing, but the Amelia Earhart, she was during a descent while in the Pacific Ocean. Earhart radioed that she could not see her landing strip and was running low on gas. But Flight 19 disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle in December 1945, halfway through their training exercise, more than 100 miles off the coast of Florida. Is it really that close to Florida?
Yeah, very close. And we can see from the evidence that they are actually flying parallel, but they're going a bit of a northeast. So the radio fix is about 150 miles off Daytona. That's the last known radio fix. Now, the question is, how much longer did they fly? What direction did they fly? Did they all stay together? Did they all split up? So it could be like when we were out searching, it could be that we're looking for 5 really tiny needles in one massive haystack, if you know what I mean. There's a lot out there. So it's going to take a long time for us to do this methodically. And that's part of the fun of it. There's part of the fun of it. There's so much to it.
Can you send me everything that you have on Flight 19 or everything that I can actually study a little bit, then bring you back on to talk more about it. So I don't just hit you with the fucking lab right in the beginning of the conversation. Yeah, that'd be great.
I'd be happy to. Sure. Yeah. The Flight 19 thing is interesting. Just simply because it goes off on so many different tangents. And I think it's amazing. And to be honest with you, really instructive for what we were chatting about today. In other words, taking a proper approach to these kind of mysteries where you could potentially legitimately solve what is at the heart of these without running off to a point where people accuse you of being a conspiracy theorist. Right? So yeah, I'd be happy to, I'll be happy to send you, some information. We can go from there and take a look at the possible theories. We can rank them. We can figure out, if you're putting the money out, and that's basically what it comes down to. If you're going to put the money out, where are you going to prioritize that money, right? How are you going to do it? What are you going to look at first? What is the most probable? And then examine each one of those and then check off the list as you go. You may find the answer right away, somewhere in the middle, or, who knows? Maybe we end up finding out something that we never even suspected. Could be. That's all the fun of research, isn't it?
You've given me enough of your time, David. Where can people find your links? I would probably keep talking to you for another hour, but I know you said you got till 11. It's 10:40, so I'm like,
Yeah, I have to go off and teach. I have to go off and teach.
Good luck.
Yeah, thanks. No, actually, you can find me on Twitter. And I can't even remember my Twitter handle anymore. I think it's O'Keefe Historian or David O'Keefe Historian on Twitter.
I'll link it in
and
the
then you can
description.
find me. Yeah, you can You can find me on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. All the requisite social media, without a doubt. And you can also reach me at the college where I teach, which is you can find the email. It's called Marianopolis College. It's in Montreal. It's Marianopolis, Marianopolis College, and it's in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So there you go.
I'll make sure I link it all in the description. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.